I called my husband worthless in front of his boss, and I said it like it was nothing, like it was just a fact everyone already knew. We were at his company's anniversary dinner, seated at a round table draped in white linen, surrounded by people in suits who laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny. Daniel had just been introduced by his boss as one of the most reliable guys on the floor, and I laughed. Not a small laugh, a real one, the kind that turns heads. Someone asked what was so funny, and before I could stop myself, I said, "Reliable? He can't even keep our bills paid on time. I don't know what floor you're talking about, but it's definitely not the one holding up our house." The table went quiet. His boss, a tall woman named Renata, looked at her wine glass like it had suddenly become the most interesting object in the room. Daniel didn't look at me. He looked down at his plate, and for a moment, I felt powerful, like I had finally said out loud what I'd been carrying around for months. I need to explain why I was so angry, because I wasn't always like this. Daniel and I had been married for 11 years. We met in college, broke and hopeful, the kind of poor where you split a sandwich and call it a date. He worked construction back then, and I was in nursing school, and we used to talk about the life we'd build like it was already ours. Somewhere along the way, the hope turned into exhaustion. He took a job at a logistics company, steady but unglamorous, and I became a full-time nurse with rotating shifts that left me hollow. We stopped talking about dreams and started talking about who forgot to pay the electric bill. I convinced myself he had stopped trying. I convinced myself I was the only one holding our life together, and somewhere in that conviction, I stopped seeing him as a person and started seeing him as a disappointment I had to manage. That night, after I humiliated him at his own company dinner, we drove home in silence. I remember staring out the window, half expecting him to yell, almost wanting him to, because at least then I could yell back and feel justified. But he didn't yell. He pulled into our driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for a long moment with his hands still on the wheel. Then he turned to me and said 6 words. "I paid off the house today." That was it. 6 words. Flat and quiet. No anger in them at all. I laughed again, out of confusion this time, because it didn't make sense. We had a 30-year mortgage. We were nowhere close to paying it off. I asked him what he meant, and he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper, a payoff confirmation from the bank, dated that morning. He explained it slowly, like he was tired of holding the secret in. For the past 4 years, every time I thought he was being careless with money, he had actually been working a second job on weekends, doing electrical side work for a contractor friend, cash under the table, money he never touched, never spent, never even mentioned. He'd been quietly funneling it into extra mortgage payments, trying to surprise me on our anniversary, which was 2 weeks away. He said he didn't tell me because he wanted it to mean something, wanted me to feel the relief without knowing it was coming, the way he used to plan surprises for me back when we were young and had nothing. Instead, I had spent those 4 years assuming the worst of him. I had built a whole narrative in my head, one where he was lazy, indifferent, unreliable, and I had just performed that narrative in front of the one room full of people whose opinion of him mattered for his career. I didn't say anything for a while. I just sat there holding that piece of paper, feeling something crack open in my chest. It wasn't just guilt, though there was plenty of that. It was the realization that I had stopped asking him questions. Somewhere in 11 years of marriage, I had stopped being curious about the person sleeping next to me every night. I had decided who he was and stopped checking if I was right. I thought about all the nights he came home late, smelling like sawdust and sweat, and I had rolled my eyes and assumed he'd been avoiding me instead of asking where he'd actually been. The next morning, I called Renata. I don't know what came over me, but I needed to fix at least the part of the damage I could see. I told her the truth, that I'd spoken out of my own bitterness, and it had nothing to do with who Daniel actually was, that the man she'd hired was quietly the most dependable person I had ever known, dependable enough to spend 4 years working 2 jobs without ever asking for credit. She was kind about it, more understanding than I deserved, and she told me Daniel's work had never once given her reason to doubt him. Things didn't heal overnight. Trust doesn't work that way, and I had to earn my way back into really seeing him, not just living beside him. But that night taught me something I carry with me still, something I think about every time I catch myself assuming the worst about the people closest to me. Silence isn't always absence. Sometimes the person you've written off as giving up is the one quietly building the floor you're standing on.